Campaign 2018 is sponsored by Wisconsin Hospital Association, Wisconsin Counties Association, Wisconsin Realtors Association, Marshfield Clinic Health System, and Campaign 2018 partner Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel.
WisconsinEye covering the 2018 elections at the Milwaukee Library. Rick Banks of Milwaukee is a Democrat running in the 16th Assembly District. Mr. Banks, welcome to WisconsinEye.
Thank you for having me.
A little bit about your background and why you're running, sir?
Okay, so I'm Rick Banks. I'm the son of a handyman and a housekeeper. Working class parents right here in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Was born and raised in the district, have a lot of family in the district. Went to school at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee after graduating from MPS at Riverside University High School, where I studied political science and economics at UWM. Was a student activist and student leader on campus, did a lot in terms of setting policy with student government, being an activist following Scott Walker's passage of Act 10. And then after that, I became a community organizer in the Harambe neighborhood, where I helped start a home repair grant program, did some youth programming, as well as do park improvements and deal with crime and safety issues.
And what do you consider the top issue in the 16th?
I think the top issue in the 16th is economic development and investment, or lack thereof. It's a very diverse district. You've got parts of downtown and River West and some other neighborhoods, but you also have the 30th Street Industrial Corridor and some majority black neighborhoods where they're not seeing that investment. They're not seeing new businesses coming to their neighborhoods. They're not seeing healthy food options and things like that. So making sure that we have investment coming to the neighborhood, investment that's being controlled by the neighborhood and being directed by the needs of the neighborhoods in the 16th district, I think are the top priorities for the people. Should
those investments come from the Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation, or where in state government should the help come from?
Yeah, I think WEDC could play more of a part in that. Ultimately, it should be led and controlled by the people who are already in those neighborhoods. So as they come up with business ideas, as they come up with the needs that their community needs, they should be the ones leading the creation of whatever those services and businesses are. And then the biggest issue for many of those people are access to capital and financial resources, and that's where I think the state can do more to help.
I think the four-year graduation rate from MPS is only about 60%. How could that graduation rate be improved, Mr. Banks?
I think it's a combination of both internal and external factors when it comes to MPS. Externally, the more economic development we have in our communities, the more opportunity people have, the less trauma and stress that they have to deal with. And so as students go to school with less on their minds about, the things that are happening in their home life, they're more focused on, learning and getting things done in school. But internally, I think we need to provide more research to MPS so that they're equipping our students with the skills and technological needs that they need in order to be successful and be able to graduate within that 4 years.
The choice program has been around in Milwaukee, and now it's in Racine and statewide for about 25 years. Do you support it?
I do not. I don't think it's been a success. I would support ending the new enrollments into the choice program and scaling it back over a number of years.
Scaling it back over a number of years. One of the big issues in the next budget is whether to build a new state prison. The prison in Waupun and Green Bay were built in the 1800s. We're closing the two juvenile prisons. And I understand there are calls to close the Milwaukee Secure Detention Facility. What's your position on both those issues, state prison and MSDF?
Regarding MSDF, I support closing that facility. The conditions there I don't think are humane, and it's not addressing the needs of the community, especially I think regarding crimeless fabrications. That's a practice I think that we need to scale back and end. We don't need to lock people up for minor technicalities. As far as new prisons, if our old prisons are outdated and in order to maintain what we have, and we can replace those, but overall we should be scaling back our prison population and making sure that we're not incarcerating people who don't need to be incarcerated, that we should legalize marijuana so that that's something that we're not incarcerating people for, and overall just doing things, providing more alternatives to incarceration, drug courts, drug treatment, community service, things that we're not necessarily locking people up for.
With mass shootings and school shootings, do we need to change Wisconsin gun laws?
Oh, absolutely.
How?
I think we should pass universal background checks. I think that we should make it harder for people to get guns through straw purchases and things like that. And ultimately just making sure that our communities are safer, that there's less guns in our city, on our streets, making sure that people don't have access to dangerous weaponry.
There's a big impasse, a gridlock in the Capitol on how to pay for highways and bridges. How would you pay for highways and bridges in the future?
Well, I think there's many things that we could do. I would potentially support a modest increase in the gas tax. I think we also should possibly explore setting up tolls, especially kind of at the entry points around the state, not necessarily going in between cities and the states. But ultimately, I think that we should maybe move away from the segregated transportation fund and incorporate it back into the full state budget. No other entity or funding entity has a separate funding system, and I don't think that transportation is that much different from anything else that it should be segregated. So making sure that we're putting that back in, but also the state should pass at least as it relates to public transportation and the transportation fund, the sales tax that was passed by the Milwaukee County voters, I think a few years ago, should be passed so that the Milwaukee County at least isn't leaning so heavily on the state in order to fund its public transportation
Should there be a RTA, a regional transit?
Absolutely, yes. So I'm a person who rode the bus for the majority of my life. Either I biked or I took the bus, and so having access to be able to get to jobs and opportunities that are further out into the region, I think that's something that we absolutely should push for. A regional transit authority would help someone who works in Milwaukee get to a job at Foxconn or get to a job somewhere else in Kenosha and Racine, and even potentially connect to Chicago and be able to work there without having access to a vehicle. And so for many people in my community who don't have cars, that's going to be very important.
You mentioned Foxconn. The total package of state and local tax breaks and tax incentives is more than $4 billion. You think that's a good investment? Do you think any people in the 16th will get jobs in Foxconn?
I do not think people in the 16th will get jobs in Foxconn, nor do I think it was a good investment. When you do the math, it comes out to between $219 to $580 something odd $1,000 per job. I mean, imagine if we had invested that into the people, 13,000 people in the 16th district, for their ability to start businesses and create jobs right here in the community. With Foxconn, I think the majority of the people who are going to be getting those jobs could be potentially coming from Illinois or somewhere else or out of the state. And I don't think it's the most benefit to our communities in Milwaukee or in Wisconsin in general.
So had you been in the assembly, you would have voted against it?
I would have absolutely voted against it.
Local governments have been living with levy limits that limit property taxes since 2006. Some local government officials say limits are really hurting their ability to provide local services. Do you think we ought to loosen the limits or get rid of them?
I think they should be gotten rid of. I'm a firm believer in local control and that the people closest to the situation are most prepared to deal with it. And with that, local governments are most knowledgeable on the needs of their communities and what they need to pay for and what their constituents want. And I think that if their constituents are willing to pay for an increase in their property tax levy, then the government should have the ability to raise that rate.
UW system funding, we're in the 6th year of a freeze on resident undergraduate tuition. Should that freeze continue into a 7th and 8th year through the next budget?
Well, it's kind of a complicated question. I think that ultimately our UW system should move towards being as tuition free as possible. So with that would mean the state would have to do more in terms of providing support to the UW system. Overall, without that though, I would support ending the freeze in order so that the schools can raise more money. Speaking specifically regarding UWM, University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, I know that they're experiencing a staff drain right now because they can't afford to pay their faculty the rates that they need in order to attract quality faculty. So the faculty that's there is leaving to go elsewhere. The faculty that isn't there isn't really considering it because the lack of financial support coming from the state. So the state needs to do more to invest in our public schools and invest in our UW system. And that ultimately would benefit the students because they'd have that investment, but ultimately it should be tuition free.
2 questions on healthcare. Does state government have a role in retaining and recruiting physicians, nurses, and other healthcare professionals? State government have a duty? Do you think it's part of state government's job description?
I would say so, yeah. Maintaining the health of our communities is something that the state government should be leading the way in. And so part of that is making sure our communities have the physicians and doctors and other service people that we need in order to stay healthy. So as much as they can. But without a universal healthcare system that should ultimately, in my opinion, be passed by the federal government, I think that the state should do more to make sure that more people in the state are insured. We should have accepted the Medicaid expansion and worked to make sure that everybody in our state has the insurance that they need.
I know the 16th is one of Wisconsin's most urban districts, but what about rural health care? They have unique issues. They're older people, older residents, young people leaving.
For sure.
Household income is not as high as the statewide average. Thoughts on continuing and improving rural health care, Mr. Banks?
I think a lot of the issues between the rural and urban seem different, but ultimately I think they're very similar in terms of just lack of investment, lack of access, people who don't want to put that there because they don't feel like they're going to get a financial return. So for me, it's about the state doing more to supplement those activities and those health care of the people in those communities, more access to doctors and the services that they need. Is the state should take a
What are
lead
some
in that.
potential next steps in fighting the heroin, methamphetamine, and opioid epidemics?
I think it's multi-pronged as much as possible, all hands on deck kind of thing. But I think that we need to make sure that the people who are affected by this have access to the treatments that they need, that make sure that the first responders know how to deal with when they have people who are affected by the crisis, making sure they have the drugs available, but also making sure that we're preventing people from becoming addicted in the first place in terms of restricting access to folks who don't need it, and making sure that the people who do have it are educated on the dangers of it and knowing the consequences of what happens with that.
And then last question, it's an open seat, five-way primary on August 14th.
For sure.
You want to highlight differences between you and your opponents? Why you think you're most qualified?
Sure. I would say there's three things that set me apart. One is my background. I'm born and raised right here in the Milwaukee area, but being somebody who's grew up working class and having been through the struggle more or less. I've been on the bus, I've been homeless before. Many of my family are still very working class. I consider myself still working class, so I'm very close to a lot of the issues that I feel like a lot of the people in my district deal with. And with that, me being naturally kind of a policy nerd, my thing is to study and to look up solutions to different issues, look at what other people around the country are doing, and work to bring those to the city. And that's what I've been doing. I'm working on many different issues. I've been working to create home repair grants, as I've said, working on creating new cooperative businesses through a credit union that I've been working to start, working to provide youth programming, just really working on the ground with people to solve everyday issues. And the last point, I think, is my vision for economic development. And for me, that's not waiting on a corporation or some other business to come into the city and put jobs and then we give them tax breaks or thousands of dollars or whatever that means. My vision is, let's look at the people that are there, let's look at their capacities, let's look at their needs and wants, and let's invest in them. Let's make sure they have the things that they need as far as healthcare, good living jobs, but also more importantly, making sure that we're investing in their visions for creating businesses, for starting the services that they want to provide for their community, and let's make sure that they have the financial capacity to do so. I think when we invest in the people that are there, that's how you get economic development without displacement. That's how you stop gentrification. That's how you encourage investment in a neighborhood without displacing the people who are already there.
Thank you. Rick Banks of Milwaukee is a Democratic candidate in the 16th Assembly District. The primary is August 14th. Mr. Banks, thank you for talking to WisconsinEye.
Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.